Hi, I'm Wes, the Explosion, and this is the Backlog. Game 1 this week is Celeste by Matt Makes Games. This is an indie title that was so well received, I think it even got nominated for Game of the Year when it came out, so I imagine it doesn't need much introduction. For video structure reasons, though, the main character, Madeline, is dealing with mental health issues, namely depression, and travels to the mountain Celeste to scale it and hopefully clear her mind. Along the way, she meets other characters that are dealing with their own problems. Celeste seems to have the strange power to make inner problems become outer ones, so Madeline faces more dangers than just those typically associated with mountain climbing. The game is a platformer, where you're constantly moving from one screen to the next, using an air dash, climbing, and interactable stage elements to advance. If you die, you start back at where you entered the screen and try again. There are collectible strawberries that are entirely optional, them being there just to test your skills, and a few other collectibles thrown in here and there. Sometimes they're in your path and require a bit of extra effort to get, other times you need to go out of your way onto side paths where the collectible is the only purpose. And in case it's not obvious by some of the little details I've given thus far, this game is hard. Really hard. You're supposed to die over and over again, learning by your mistakes what works and what doesn't. You can easily rack over 100 deaths, depending on your skill level, possibly hundreds, on a single chapter. When I checked out GameFAQs, there were a lot of complaints of the game's difficulty and the spike that takes place in Chapter 3, which is worth talking about. There are 7 chapters in the main game and 2 post-game that can be unlocked. I didn't get what I needed to open these up, so I can only speak on the main game, and it was quite difficult, so it was somewhat of a relief when I couldn't access them. I played the game all in one day, taking breaks between chapters, so after Chapter 7, I really just needed a break. While there are some elements present throughout the entire game, each chapter features a specific gimmick or hazard that you need to learn how to make use of or contend with Chapter 7 giving you a new ability and then taking you through a gauntlet of screens styled after the previous levels. Chapter 1 isn't bad, 2 is a bit trickier, and then 3 is where things start actually getting brutal. That said, I wouldn't say things get progressively difficult. For me, Chapter 4 was the worst, where I had to contend with wind, which I really hate in platformers, especially if they require any sort of precision. While I did get more deaths in Chapter 7, it also contained harder wind sections, so I stand by Chapter 4 being the worst. Given though that other players might find other challenges better or worse, depending on their playstyle, someone else could have a very different and just as legitimate opinion on this. It can also be hard to judge which stages are worse based off of just death count. On a stage you're more comfortable with, you could actually end up with more deaths due to you trying for more collectibles, instead of just feeling out of your elements so that you worry about completing just the stage themselves. Speaking of those, I did find myself at times wishing there was some sort of map, because sometimes I got lost trying to find the right path and instead just getting to dead ends with bonuses. Though, I was able to get through the game without having to look one up, so it's not too horrible. The game also encourages you to rack up a high death count, not resetting on subsequent tries, and even giving you a message sometimes on the loading screen, telling you that a high death count is a good measure of how much you've learned. This could be a further metaphor for mental health where by continually trying, even if you fail, you're still learning something and improving yourself as a person. It does make the metaphor a bit more depressing though when you think about how many people have probably given up on beating this game, as well as likely have given up on beating their own inner demons. Overall though, I love this game. I wouldn't have beaten it in a day if I didn't. It took me just under 4.5 hours and 856 deaths, which I think is probably below the average. No doubt that my love of platformers and my childhood of playing mainly them helped immensely. This isn't so much a brag as it is a warning that most people will have a lot more trouble with this game than I did, and it will require a lot of perseverance just to get through it. If you're up for the challenge and have a penchant for platformers though, you'll love this game. Just be aware of its difficulty going into it. I also got through The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening by Nintendo, obviously. In this title, Link is shipwrecked and washes up on the island of Koholint, where he's discovered by a girl named Marin. You set out on a quest to find several magical instruments to wake up a giant egg, being told that this is the only way you can leave the island. To accomplish this requires standard Zelda fare, traveling the overworld to discover dungeons and getting new items and equipment to solve puzzles. The big twist this time, though, is that while there are still your normal enemies, such as Moblins and Octoroks, there are others mixed in from other games, like Goombas and Shy Guys from Mario, and even Gordos from Kirby. This is super charming, and speaking of super charming, just look at these graphics. Everything looks like toys from a child's playset, giving the game an extra layer of whimsy. The way the game looked was largely why I decided to pick it up. That, and I got it at a price that seemed more reasonable for a game I was leery about. I don't typically like top-down games. Not really sure why, for some reason the style just doesn't seem to click with me. I played Hyper Light Drifter last year and, while objectively, I can tell that it's a good game, I spent a good bit of time getting frustrated and asking myself why I was even playing it. Here though, it didn't seem to affect me. Maybe it was because of the lower difficulty, making it so that I didn't get stuck and frustrated too often. I did die twice, once to, embarrassingly, the first boss when I had only 3 hearts, the second time when I didn't realize I had to manually use fairies to recover. Maybe it was the lovely visuals. Maybe it was the characters from other games that kept me interested to see what else would show up. Maybe it was the fact that I could actually jump, which appeals to my platforming prowess. Maybe it was that damn crane minigame that is equal parts frustrating and addicting. Regardless, I got through it without too much trouble. I have some slight nitpicks though. First is how the controller is set up. You have your control stick for movement, 1 button for sword, 1 for interacting, 2 for setting items, the left shoulder's for dashing, and the right shoulder's for shield. I'm a little annoyed that both the dash and shield had 2 buttons for each. That left only 2 buttons for equipable items. Given that I pretty much always had the item that let me jump equipped, that meant that I essentially had only 1 button for other items that I was constantly pausing to swap out at some points. If I could have used one of the extra shoulder buttons for other items, that would have been ideal. Maybe they formatted it this way for simpler controllers, but if I had one with extra buttons equipped, then the option would have been nice. Also, I used the jump throughout the game way more than the dash or shield, with only the sword seeing more action, so letting those 2 also be equipment that I could swap out would have been better. Then there are also certain power-ups and collectibles that the game pauses to give you an explanation for every time you pick one up, which is kind of unnecessary. The last issue I have is that there are a few quests, one in particular, that seem optional but aren't so much. The one I'm thinking of is the trade chain, where you get 1 item, you find out who wants it, you get a new item, then you continue doing that until you get one that is almost a required item at the end. Without getting into it, the last area has a maze with a randomized path, and getting to the end of the trade chain will grant you an item that lets you find the path. I'm not sure how you'd be able to beat the game without this, other than with luck and perseverance. I thought this was just a cute side hustle, and while early on, what you need to do is pretty obvious or the solution will just fall into your lap, later on, the solution can be a bit more obscure, which can be kind of annoying. Then again, given the monkey situation, maybe it should have been more obvious that it was required. And given how quickly I got through the game, maybe I didn't take enough time to suss out the hints for the next link in the chain, so this complaint might just be on me. A few other things worth mentioning are the game's collectibles. Heart containers are here, as per usual, with every 4 collected giving you another heart in your life bar. You start with 3, get a full heart after every dungeon, meaning you naturally end with 11, so assuming that the max is 20, you would have to get 9 hearts, 36 pieces for full. I ended up with 16 hearts, so I did find more than I didn't. This was more than I expected to find, which I like because it means that collecting them was intuitive and I was able to just collect them naturally by playing the game. Then there are the secret seashells. I believe I read that there were 50 of them, and I think I found just over 30, which is again a good amount for a casual playthrough. These are the random collectible that you find in Zelda games for extra rewards. Think Skulltulas or Korok Seeds. There are also several minigames you can find in Koholint. The one is this game's gimmick that has amiibo functionality, the Dungeon Maker. Dampe runs it, and you collect chamber stones to expand what you can do. Dampe gives you challenges as you progress, which you can complete to get rewards. I started to do the tutorial, got bored and quit, so I don't really have much to say about this. These sorts of things don't really appeal to me, honestly. I also read that there's a rafting minigame that you can do to get certain collectibles, supplies, and money, but I didn't find the entrance wandering around normally, and since I was more interested in seeing the dungeons, I didn't go out of my way to track it down. That said, it does sound like it could be fun, and since there's a fair chance that I'll play this game again sometime down the line, I'll be sure to seek it out then. There's a fishing minigame that I played a little bit to get the bottle and heart piece from, but I kinda found it boring, so I only used it a few times. I don't like regular fishing though, so I probably wasn't its target audience. Then there's the one I did get into. In the main village, there's a crane game, or UFO catcher, that you can win upgrades and money at. There are also Nintendo figures of the various enemies that you can scoop up and display around town. This game can be super irritating. You have one button to go forward and one to go to the side. Each can only be pressed once, so you need to hold them and only let go when you are in position. Once both directions have been set, the claw stops, then slowly drops, then even more slowly closes, before roughly rising again and making its way back to its starting position. If you don't get the drop perfectly, your desired prize can fall out and you'll need to try again. Given that two of the prizes are on moving platforms, the relative slowness of the claw can drive a person mad. And yet, despite all this, I love doing the game over and over again. I wound up becoming a pro at this, collecting all the Nintendo figurines, getting the title of champ, and sometimes even playing extra rounds just to get an extra rupee or so. I went in with an excess of cash and came up with multi-try strategies to make sure I got everything I needed out of the game. It's so dumb and mostly a time killer, and yet at the end, I wish there was even more that I could win. Why I was so obsessed with this side attraction I can only vaguely understand, and yet, if you give the game a try, I'd say you need to give this a go. Now, one other thing I don't believe I discussed, but most of you likely already know, this game is a remake of a Game Boy title. That's probably why this has such a unique graphical style, with the original being so dated that they needed to start from scratch. This is also likely the reason for the relative easiness of the game, with the limited capabilities demanding that they keep things simple. Well, I guess they could have gone with the alternative and made it super hard, requiring you to perform super precise actions with your very limited options, and beating you into the dirt for small missteps like some older games, so I'm glad they went with the more forgiving route. Some of those old games are brutal. I heard someone else talking about this game and saying about how hard button mapping was in the original due to there being only 2 primary buttons. That made my one complaint with the game several times worse, which I cringe at imagining. Still though, I have to wonder how some of the elements in this game originally manifested in the original. The crane game, for one. Was this a new addition to this edition, or did they actually have a version of this in the Game Boy title? Then there's the puzzle with the pillar smashing that seems pretty advanced for the old system. I'm very tempted to seek out a playthrough of the original game just to compare the two, though I'm not sure I want to commit to one. Beyond that though, I find it curious that this was the title to get a remake. If I had to guess, I would have suggested that either Link to the Past or the original Zelda would have been the first of the top-down titles to get remade. Maybe I'm forgetting one, or I'm expected to count ports, but the last time I saw one of these updated was Link to the Past for the Game Boy Advance. I wonder if this was a passion project for someone at Nintendo that they gave the green light to. It is the sort of game that leaves an impression, with some of the titles in the series being either bright and fantastical or dark and brooding, with Link's Awakening being more whimsical and melancholy. And while Hyrule Warriors barely references some of the games, like Minish Cap and the Oracle titles, This game got a whole bonus map and Marin as a playable character, so it definitely made an impression on someone, with me now also joining those ranks. While I'm not sure why this title was the one selected for the remake treatment, I'm glad that it did and I remember this game for a long time. Before this, I only ever liked 4 Legend of Zelda mainline games, and with Link's Awakening, I can now add a 5th. I'll probably play it again in a few years when I start missing Golan and want to remember. If anything about this game seems appealing, give it a try and I don't think you'll be disappointed. Oh, and then there was one more thing. Ha! Ha 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 ha! Ah, the 9.9s are mine! So that's it for this week. I didn't think I'd finish Link's Awakening and that it'd end up spilling over into the next episode, but now we're down to 120. Though the eShop does have some sales. That's a decision for another time though, so for now, thanks for watching, maybe subscribe if you enjoy this sort of thing, and perhaps I'll see you next time. Oh, and I have my new PC up and running, I just need to decide what type of editing software to equip. The better ones require a subscription, and I'm not sure if $20 a month is something I want to spend on something I'm not doing full-time. Heck, probably not even part-time, so I'm open to suggestions. For now though, thanks again, and have a lovely day.